My fiancée said that our wedding would not take place a week before the wedding, so I told my lawyer and took everything away from her. I woke up that morning with my heart pounding so violently that it felt like it might shatter my ribs. We were exactly 1 week away from our wedding. For months, I had counted down every day, replaying our ceremony in my mind, imagining the way her dress would flow, how our closest friends would smile, and the promise of forever she and I had whispered to each other so many nights. We had built an entire life together, brick by careful brick. The day began normally. I kissed her tenderly on the forehead before heading to my office, mentally strategizing how I'd finalize the seating chart that afternoon. At midday, my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen. Her name. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the tremor in my hands. Without greeting, she simply said, "We need to talk. Now." I met her at our favorite cafe just around the corner. The place where we'd laughed so many times, where she'd cried when reciting wedding vows in practice, and where we dreamed of growing old together. She sat at a secluded corner table, arms wrapped tightly around her body as if to shield herself from the world. Her eyes were red, she'd been crying. I sat across from her, chest twisting, as if anticipating a bullet. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She looked down, did not respond. Tension filled every silence. I reached for her trembling hand, but she pulled it away. My throat tightened, I fought to breathe. "We can't do this," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't marry you next week." I felt the world tilt. She sighed, closed her eyes, and lifted her gaze as if searching for courage. "I'm sorry. I don't think this is right anymore." My heart thundered in my ears. I couldn't feel pain, I felt shock. The world slowed down, my spoon clattered on the saucer, the cafe's door jingled, but that moment felt infinite. She went on, explaining doubts that had surfaced days ago, fears she couldn't name. Her voice quivered, fractured by tears and regret. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to beg. Another part, buried deep, sensed that this was final. "You're sure?" I managed. She nodded, defeated. "Yes." For a moment the world paused. Then I felt tears burning at the edges of my eyes. All those dreams, the ceremony, the first dance, the home we'd planned, crumbled. Pain and fury intertwined in my chest. I needed air. I excused myself and stepped outside. The spring air was crisp, bracing. I gasped it in. I stared at the sky, trying to find some reason. Could someone change their mind like this, after everything? I returned, voice shaking. "Tell me what you want," I said softly. "Nothing," she whispered. "I just don't want this." I nodded once, numbly. The rest of the day blurred. I went home and stared at our wedding album prints taped to the wall, photos from our engagement shoot. Each smiling face mocked me. That night, I could barely sleep. My mind raced. But underneath the hurt, a new thought emerged, cold and resolute: she can't just walk away with everything she wanted and planned. We built this together. By morning, my grief had shifted into determination. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. I didn't sleep, didn't eat much. I outlined the assets we'd shared, our rented townhouse, the money we'd saved, the deposits made for the wedding, the gifts we'd received. Under the prenup I'd insisted on months earlier, everything was clearly laid out: shared costs, separate assets. I had been thorough, almost painfully so, also we could avoid disaster if things ever fell apart. Yet I never imagined I'd need it. On day 2, I served her papers. I felt nothing, no triumph, no relief. Only a hollow ache. She received them at our house. I watched from the driveway as she read, tears streaming again. It was ugly, painful in a way I didn't expect. She fell to her knees on the porch, hands clutching her dress, sobbing. The wedding planner called me frantic. The venue owner demanded confirmation. Guests flooded our phones with messages: congratulations, well wishes, confusion. I replied with careful words, neutral. I didn't want scandal, but I also couldn't let things slide. Inside me raged guilt and sorrow. I wondered if I was betraying everything we'd shared, not with deception, but with a cold application of law. But the rational part convinced me, I needed to protect what we'd built. If not me, someone else would. If not now, never. That afternoon, I finalized cancellations: venue, caterer, photographer. I transferred deposits, recorded files. Our name vanished from calendars, checklists, budgets. I told my lawyer to pursue everything owed under the prenup. Emotional devastation interlaced with moral certainty. I was torn, but even then, I knew. Once love erupted, once dreams formed, some part of me would never let go. Not without a fight. By the evening of day 2, I sat alone in our living room. Dusty evening light filtered through the curtains. The silence was so loud it felt solid. I stared at our empty wedding albums. I didn't cry, I couldn't. I felt something else, the rising sense of resolve. I would take back what was mine. I would rebuild. The next few days blurred into a strange rhythm. Wake up. Stare at the ceiling. Answer messages I didn't want to read. Avoid eye contact with coworkers. Pretend I was fine. But I wasn't. The house was too quiet without her. Her toothbrush still sat beside mine in the bathroom. Her robe still hung on the back of our bedroom door. I didn't touch anything. It was like she had evaporated, vanished into thin air, leaving behind the scent of her shampoo and a drawer full of socks. Every time I walked past the wedding binder on the table, my heart clenched. I tried to tell myself this wasn't a tragedy. People break up all the time. Engagements end. But I wasn't just any guy. I was a man who had built a future with someone who promised to stand beside me, only to have her say never mind at the final hour. And now I had to dismantle the life we were supposed to start. My lawyer, a calm, sharp man named Martin, was meticulous. "You had a prenup," he said on our second meeting. "It's in your favor." She waived claims to anything that wasn't explicitly shared. "And based on the financials, you contributed 70% of everything: venue, rings, even the down payment on the honeymoon." I nodded. "What does that mean in plain terms?" "It means she's not walking away with much." I didn't smile. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to feel like I hadn't been completely destroyed. That all this love and trust and investment, emotional and financial, hadn't been one giant mistake. The news hit her hard. She came to the office, unannounced. "Martin called me, she's here." "You want to talk to her?" I said yes, and 5 minutes later, she walked in wearing the coat I bought her last Christmas. Her eyes were swollen, and she didn't sit. "Is this really what you want?" she asked, voice shaking. "After everything?" "What I wanted was to marry you," I said evenly. "That's off the table. Now I want closure." She looked like I'd slapped her. "Closure doesn't mean punishing me. This isn't punishment. It's protection." She opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. She looked around the room, at the law books and sterile furniture. Then she whispered, "You really are going through with it?" I nodded. She turned to leave, but paused. "You didn't even ask why." I hesitated. That question had haunted me for days. Would the answer change anything? "I was scared," she said, quietly. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't want to wake up in 5 years feeling trapped. I stared at her. "Then you should have told me months ago. Not 7 days before everything." She didn't cry this time. She just nodded, bit her lip, and walked out. The silence after the door closed was heavier than anything she could have said. Later that week, I met with our mutual friends, who were still trying to piece everything together. One of them, Rachel, looked at me with pity. "She's broken over this," she said. "I think she regrets how she did it." "Regret doesn't reverse time," I muttered. Then Rachel said something I didn't expect. "You should know, she was talking to someone." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "Another guy." I don't know if it was serious, but they were texting. A lot. That was when something inside me went still. Cold. Numb. I asked no further questions. I returned home and sat in our once shared bedroom. For the first time, I opened the top drawer of her nightstand. Inside was a journal. I hesitated, then opened it. The first entry was dated 3 months ago. The second one, 2 weeks ago. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living a life someone else picked for me. He's so good. So stable. But what if I'm not ready for that? What if I need something more, unpredictable?" There it was. In her own handwriting. She had doubts. She'd been thinking of walking away long before she said it. Maybe she didn't cheat, but emotionally? She had already left. The final push was that journal entry. I scanned the rest quickly: pages of confusion, restlessness, questions she never asked me, thoughts she kept buried. By the end of the night, I'd boxed up everything of hers: clothes, books, keepsakes. I dropped them off at her sister's apartment. No message. No note. She called me the next morning. You didn't even say goodbye. I didn't respond. I began to change the locks. Changed my emergency contacts. Changed everything. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. A week after she walked out, I found myself wandering around what was supposed to be our wedding venue. I wasn't planning to go there. I was just driving, no destination, no music, and ended up pulling into the gravel lot out of instinct. The place was quiet. The lawn, freshly cut. The arch still stood at the edge of the hilltop, overlooking the valley where we'd planned to say our vows. I walked slowly toward it, hands buried in my jacket pockets. The space felt like a ruin. Not because it was broken, but because something sacred was supposed to have happened here and never would. I sat down on one of the white folding chairs that hadn't yet been removed. The wind was sharp, but I didn't care. My mind wandered back to when we toured this place together. She had cried when she saw the view. I remember her squeezing my hand and saying, "I feel like I belong here, with you." Now I wondered, was that moment real? Or was she just trying to believe it? As I sat there, the caretaker walked by. "I thought no one was showing up," he said gently. I nodded. "There isn't a wedding." "I heard," he replied, his voice full of awkward sympathy. "We'll take down the rest this weekend." I stood and gave him a tight smile. "I'll be out of your way." That was the moment I realized I needed to reclaim more than just my assets. I needed to reclaim myself, my narrative. The story that had been abruptly cut wasn't going to define me. And it wasn't going to end here. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in everything I had neglected. I took on new clients at work, started running again, reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to in years. And slowly, almost painfully, I began to feel alive again. But grief is strange, it doesn't announce itself. It arrives in flashes. I'd be doing dishes and suddenly remember her laugh. I'd hear a song in a coffee shop and feel that sharp sting in my chest. The pain wasn't as loud as before, but it was there, quieter, deeper. One day, I received an email from her. Short. One line. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for 5 minutes before responding. "Why?" Her reply came just as brief. "I need to explain. One last time. We met at a public park. Neutral ground." She looked thinner, tired, like she hadn't slept well in weeks. No makeup. No pretense. Just her. "I've been in therapy," she started. "Trying to make sense of everything." I said nothing. "I know what I did hurt you. I'm not here to undo it or ask you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I was wrong to leave like that. And that I didn't respect what we had. I wasn't ready, and instead of telling you, I ran. I took the coward's way out." I looked at her closely. She wasn't the same woman I once knew, not exactly. There was something broken in her now. A weight she carried. "Why now?" I asked. "Because you deserve to hear it from me, not through friends or papers. And because I don't want to be the kind of person who disappears after hurting someone who loved her so much." I exhaled slowly. Part of me wanted to lash out, to ask why she hadn't spoken up months earlier. But I didn't. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. She nodded. "I'll leave you alone now." I let her walk away. And that was the last time I saw her. In the months that followed, I made peace with the silence. I stopped checking social media, stopped wondering if she'd started dating again. I no longer flinched when someone asked about the wedding. I'd say, "It didn't happen," and leave it at that. But something remarkable started to happen. I began rebuilding not from pain, but from strength. I sold the house we once lived in and moved into a smaller place with more sunlight. I stopped blaming myself. I began journaling, cooking, volunteering at a weekend youth program. My life wasn't what I imagined it would be, but it was mine again. The final legal process wrapped up quietly. My lawyer sent me the last document with a note: "Consider this chapter closed." And so I did. It's strange how time moves differently after heartbreak. There are days that crawl, hours that stretch endlessly. Then suddenly, weeks have passed, and you realize you haven't thought of them in days. That was how healing arrived, not like a sunrise, but like fog lifting slowly. I stopped flinching when I passed the bakery where we used to get Sunday pastries. I no longer had to brace myself when someone mentioned June, what should have been our wedding month. And I realized, one quiet evening, that her toothbrush had finally been thrown out. Not out of anger, just because it had no place in my life anymore. One night, months later, I was invited to a small gathering hosted by an old college friend. I nearly didn't go. I told myself I was tired, had too much work, but the truth was, I still hesitated when it came to socializing. I wasn't ready to explain myself again. But I went. And I'm glad I did. That's where I met her, Emily. She wasn't loud. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She laughed easily and listened more than she spoke. We ended up standing near the same window, both watching the rain outside. "You look like you're lost in thought," she said. "Just wondering if I made the right choice coming here tonight," I said, with a tired smile. She tilted her head. "Still unsure?" "Less so now." We didn't exchange numbers that night. Just names. But something about the calm in her presence stayed with me. And 3 weeks later, by pure coincidence or fate, I ran into her again at a bookstore downtown. This time, we talked for hours. I didn't fall for Emily overnight. I didn't rush. I wasn't ready to throw myself into something just because I was lonely. But she didn't ask me to. She simply showed up. As a friend. A steady, consistent presence who never tried to fix me or replace what had been lost. She was different, and not just in how she looked or laughed. She had a gentleness that didn't come with expectations. I told her about the wedding. The almost marriage. The lawyer. The heartbreak. She didn't flinch. She didn't judge. "That must have been heavy," she said quietly. "It was," I admitted. "It still is, sometimes." "Then we'll carry it together," she replied. "Even if it's just a little bit." And I realized then, healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant being able to remember without falling apart. Later that winter, I received a letter. It was handwritten, the envelope familiar. From her. I debated whether to open it. My hands trembled slightly, but curiosity overruled hesitation. Inside, it was brief. Sincere. "I saw your name on the firm's announcement. Congratulations on the promotion. I always knew you'd get there. I'm truly sorry I didn't say it in person. I hope you're okay. I really do." There was no return address. I folded it neatly and placed it in the back of a drawer, not to revisit, but to preserve the final thread of that chapter. It no longer hurt to read her name. She was someone I had loved. Someone who left. Someone who taught me more than I wanted to learn. I sat back, exhaled, and looked out the window. Emily had left her scarf on the couch. A tea mug steamed quietly beside it. The sound of her laughter still echoed faintly in the room. I smiled. Spring came around again, the season when everything had once started to fall apart. And yet, this time, it felt different. I had thought that time would be the cure, but it turned out that choice was. Choosing to move on, to forgive, to open up again. Choosing to stop rewriting the past in my mind, and instead, begin writing a new story, one not haunted by what almost was, but strengthened by what had been learned. Emily and I had grown closer. We weren't rushing anything, and that was the beauty of it. Every step we took was intentional, quiet, and honest. There was no pressure, no illusions, just presence. Some evenings we'd sit in silence reading. Other nights we'd cook, music playing in the background, our laughter echoing through the kitchen. One night, while walking through the city after dinner, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about her?" I didn't lie. "Sometimes," I said. "Not the way I used to. It's more like remembering someone from a dream. Real, but distant." She nodded, not hurt, just thoughtful. "I think the people who hurt us leave footprints. But we decide whether to follow them or step around them." I looked at her and smiled. That's a good way to put it. And it was true. The imprint was still there, but I no longer walked in its shadow. I began to reflect on everything that had happened. The sudden breakup. The legal aftermath. The hollow ache of an empty house. The confusion, the shame, the nights when I questioned if I was just too difficult to love. And I saw how all of it had quietly shaped me, not into something bitter, but into someone more aware. I no longer saw myself as a victim. I saw myself as someone who had survived losing something he'd poured his soul into, and still had the strength to keep building. Sometimes I would still find her old journal when organizing drawers. I didn't read it again. I didn't need to. That version of me, the man begging for answers, no longer lived here. The house was different now. Lighter. Brighter. Fuller. Emily painted one of the bedroom walls a warm shade of blue. She added plants. She brought a quiet warmth to the space that didn't demand attention, but transformed it all the same. We never talked about marriage. Not yet. We didn't need to. What we had was real, steady, growing, not rushed by ceremony or tradition. Just nurtured by trust. One morning, almost a year to the day after the wedding that wasn't, I walked past that old venue. Not intentionally, I was just passing through town. But something made me stop the car. It looked the same. Green hills. The white arch. But I didn't feel a sting anymore. No ghosts haunted the space. I stepped out and walked a few yards onto the grass. I smiled, not out of regret, but out of recognition. This was where a chapter had ended. And where a different story had begun. Later that night, I wrote a letter, not to send, just to write. To the woman I almost married. You hurt me more than I thought was possible. But you also taught me how deep I can feel, how much I can give, and what it means to rebuild from nothing. You broke something. But you didn't destroy me. I hope you found what you were searching for. I did. Me. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across the bed. Emily was still asleep, her hand loosely wrapped around mine. I looked at her and felt something I hadn't in a long time, not a rush of excitement or a thrill of romance, but something deeper. Peace. And maybe that was the truest kind of love. Not something that sets you on fire, but something that stays when the flames go out. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.